So imagine it's the middle of the afternoon. You're stood here, you're looking around, there's fighting going on in the tents. You can see your colleagues being assegaied, people having their bellies cut open. You've got a horse. The only way you can escape is down there towards the river. The road's cut off by the right horn. If you want to get back to Rorke's Drift the way you came, not possible. That's the only way out, and that's the way we're going to walk now. So as the trail starts, it's a fairly easy, gentle walk, but I'm assured it's only going to get harder, and that if you weren't on horseback, there was no way you were going to survive. So this is the view back towards Isandlwana mountain. As you can see, it takes on a totally different look from this side. So about a kilometre along the trail, you come to this line of cairns. On average, I'm told that there's probably about 8 bodies under each cairn. So this is probably the site of a last stand, presumably by one of the companies of the 1st 24th. You probably won't get a sense of this, but I'm pretty certain this is the biggest spider I've ever seen. So this is the spot where the 2 guns of the Royal Artillery were finally lost. So we've just come down this slope here, and we've reached this stream bed, and we're now going to follow it along to the first of the 2 rivers. So after walking through that gully, you come out here at the first river we need to cross, which is very shallow. As you can see, it's hard, solid rock underneath. This is the Manzinyama River. So shortly after the first river there, we come to yet another stream bed. So you can only imagine how slow and treacherous this must have been, especially while having to fend off Zulu warriors. So now comes a steep climb up Mpete Hill. So we've just reached the top of Mpete Hill. It's a steep climb, it's doable, but we're not being chased. So on the reverse side of Mpete Hill, there's grasslands leading down. And those on horses thought that would be a good way to go. You know, they'd be able to outrun the Zulus. But actually, on the day it was very boggy, and the horses got stuck, and the Zulus came and they killed the riders. So since we reached the peak of Mpete Hill, it's been pretty flat going actually, not too difficult, just a bit rocky. But it's worth bearing in mind that on the day of the battle, it wouldn't have been so green, there wouldn't have been so many trees, and you would have been able to see much further. So we've been going about 3 hours, we've taken a pretty leisurely pace, a couple of breaks. First view of the Buffalo River, that's where we're heading. That's where the guys were heading on the day to try and escape across the bank into what was then Natal. I jumped off and led my horse down. There was a poor fellow of the mounted infantry, stuck through the arm, who said as I passed that if I could bind up his arm and stop the bleeding, he would be all right. I accordingly took out my handkerchief and tied up his arm. Just as I had done it, Major Smith of the artillery came down by me, wounded, saying, "For God's sake, get on, man, the Zulus are on top of us." I had done all I could for the wounded man, and so turned and jumped on my horse. Just as I was doing so, the horse went with a bound to the bottom of the precipice, being stuck with an assegai. I gave up all hope as the Zulus were all around me, finishing off the wounded, the man I had helped and Major Smith amongst the number. However, with a strong word missing here, presumably hope, that everybody clings to, that some accident would turn up, I rushed off on foot and plunged into the river, which was little better than a roaring torrent. So this is the Buffalo River, this is where the guys were heading. But actually at the time, the riverbank would have been there. It was a much bigger river, it was much deeper, and it was much more rapid, much more difficult to cross than it looks now. On that riverbank there was absolute carnage. Members of the NNC were fighting against the Zulu warriors there, and they were caught between a rock and a hard place because very few of them could swim, which left them the choice: jump in the river and drown, or die fighting. So amongst those coming down to the river were Melville and Coghill, two men who were the first in the British Army to receive the Victoria Cross posthumously. And they came down here and they tried to cross the river. They were carrying the Queen's colour. Coghill managed to make it over there to the Natal bank, but Melville had difficulty and was swept downstream. This is the famous coffin-shaped rock, or it would have been. It doesn't look much like a coffin now. And this is where Melville and Lieutenant Higginson were hanging on for dear life. Okay, so at the end of the walk for us, now comes the fun part. We're going to ferry the bags over on a dinghy, and then myself and Ollie are going to swim. Finally starting to warm up. Okay, there's rocks. Let me walk. Okay, so we've come out the other side. We're now up on the hill overlooking the Buffalo River. And more or less down here is where Private Wassell won his VC. He was a mounted infantryman who, as he came down the hill here, he heard a gurgle below him where there was a bit of a whirlpool where people were getting stuck. He looked down, he saw a colleague, Private Westwood. So he tied up his horse, he jumped in, put Westwood on a rock, went back for his horse, and then used the horse to get them both across. Now at the time, nobody knew who'd done this brave deed, and he then went on to have the luck or bad luck, however way you look at it, of fighting in the northern column at the Battle of Hlabani, another tough fight and another defeat for the British. It was only later on, when Westwood was in hospital and gave the story of who'd saved his life, that finally Wassell won the VC that he deserved. So after a lot of drama, Melville, Coghill and Higginson did make it across the river. Melville and Coghill were struggling. Coghill was injured, Melville was exhausted, and between the three of them they had no horses, so Higginson went away to try and find horses. When he came back, he said he was amazed to see that Melville had carried Coghill as far as this up the hill. This is probably about 200 metres from the actual river itself. He'd made it this far. As he looked down from probably over there, he heard a sound, stabbing sound, and that was when he knew Melville and Coghill were dead. So 13 days later, a search party sent out from Rorke's Drift came here and found the bodies. They then went down and they were able to find the Queen's colour washed in the river there. So the honour of the regiment was restored at last.